The most powerful sound in the universe isn't an explosion, it's the silence that follows. Especially when it comes from the person who was never allowed to be quiet. You carry a world of unspoken knowledge in your silence. For years, you've been the emotional sanctuary for others, absorbing their chaos so they could find peace. So why is it that when you finally go quiet, when you finally retreat to save yourself, your silence feels like thunder to them? What if I told you this withdrawal isn't an act of weakness or surrender? It is a sacred rebalancing. It's a force of nature that reveals the uncomfortable truth of who was really holding the world together. We're about to explore why the empath's quiet exit is the most devastating and transformative act of power. Not because it's cruel, but because it forces everyone to finally face the reflection in the mirror you've left behind. This is the story of what really happens during an empath's quiet exit. And I promise you, it's nothing like what you think, because the person who's been invisible their entire life, they're about to become the most dangerous force anyone ever underestimated. You know what's fascinating? The people who hold entire worlds together are often the ones no one notices. Until they stop. Think about it. There's someone in your life right now who's always been there. The one who remembers birthdays, who checks in when you're struggling, who somehow makes everything feel safer just by existing. They don't demand attention, they don't create drama, they just give. But here's what most people don't realize. That person didn't choose to be the eternal helper. They were trained for it. Carl Jung, the brilliant psychologist who mapped the hidden territories of the human mind, called this the helper persona. And persona, by the way, literally means mask. This isn't their true face. It's a sophisticated survival mechanism they constructed, often in childhood when love was conditional and safety was scarce. Picture this. A little kid learns that the only way to secure love is to become indispensable, to manage everyone else's emotions, to be the one who fixes, who soothes, who carries the family's pain so others don't have to. That child grows up wearing this mask so long, they forget it's not actually their face. You've been the emotional infrastructure of other people's lives. Think about infrastructure for a moment. Roads, bridges, electrical grids. Nobody notices them until they fail. The empath is the psychological equivalent of a foundation stone. Invisible, essential, holding up entire relational ecosystems without recognition or thanks. But Jung warned us about something crucial. A man cannot get rid of himself in favor of an artificial personality without punishment. When you identify so completely with being helpful that you lose track of who you are underneath, your psyche will eventually revolt. The helper role provides what psychologists call secondary gains, hidden payoffs that make it addictive. You get to feel needed, important, morally superior. You get to avoid your own pain by constantly focusing on everyone else's. You get to live in the safe, familiar territory of giving rather than risking the vulnerability of receiving. But here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. You weren't chosen for your kindness. You were recruited for your capacity to absorb pain. Think about the people who consistently seek you out. Really think about them. When do they call? When do they text? It's usually when they're in crisis, isn't it? They don't call when they're happy and want to share joy. They call when they need someone to process their drama, their anxiety, their latest relationship disaster. You've become a psychological dumping ground. And the most insidious part, you've been trained to see this as love. This is where it gets really twisted. Society applauds this role. Oh, you're such a good person. You're so selfless. I don't know what I'd do without you. The world rewards the helper, making the mask even harder to remove. You get addicted to being needed because it's the only way you've learned to feel valuable. But your nervous system is keeping score. All that absorbed emotional energy, all that constant vigilance, all that self-abandonment, it has to go somewhere. And it shows up as burnout, as mystery illnesses, as this bone-deep exhaustion that sleep can't fix. You know that feeling when you literally cannot fake the smile anymore. When your body starts rebelling, maybe hair falling out, maybe chronic fatigue, maybe you just can't bring yourself to answer the phone. That's not weakness, that's your authentic self staging an intervention. Your psyche is essentially saying, we need to talk, this performance is killing us. Because here's what Jung understood that most people miss. The helper persona isn't just a role you play, it's a prison you've built around your true self. And every prison, no matter how beautifully decorated, eventually becomes a tomb. The people around you have grown dependent on your emotional labor in ways they don't even recognize. They've outsourced their emotional regulation to you. They've learned that they don't need to develop their own coping skills because, well, they have you. You've become the external nervous system for people who never learned to manage their own internal world. And the most devastating part? You can't see it because you're inside the system. You're like a fish trying to analyze water. The very environment that's drowning you has become so familiar that you think it's just how life works. But here's where this gets really interesting, and why your quiet exit is going to be far more impactful than you realize. When someone who has been the invisible foundation of an entire relational ecosystem suddenly steps back, they don't just leave a gap. They expose the house of cards that was built on their sacrifice. And that revelation, that's going to shake everyone involved to their very core. So that house of cards I mentioned, it's not built by accident. There's an invisible contract being signed every day between you and the people who drain you. And here's the part that's going to make you uncomfortable. You're not just the victim in this dynamic. You're also the architect. I know, that stings. But stay with me. Think about the last person who really got under your skin. The one who always takes and never gives, who treats you like their personal emotional dumping ground, who somehow makes everything about them. Got someone in mind? Now here's the question that's going to change everything. What if they're not just using you? What if they're completing you? Jung discovered something revolutionary about human relationships. He found that we don't just randomly attract difficult people into our lives. We unconsciously seek out people who carry the parts of ourselves we've disowned and buried in what he called the shadow. Your shadow isn't your dark side. It's your disowned side. It's every part of yourself you learned was unacceptable, dangerous, or shameful. And here's the twist. Often, that includes your power. Let me paint you a picture. You, the eternal giver, have spent your entire life repressing your capacity for healthy selfishness. Your right to say no. Your permission to put yourself first. Your natural aggression that sets boundaries and protects your energy. Where did all that energy go? It didn't disappear. You projected it onto the takers in your life. The person who enrages you with their selfishness? They're living out your disowned capacity for self-preservation. The one who seems to effortlessly put themselves first? They're expressing the healthy narcissism you are never allowed to develop. The person who can say no without guilt? They're wielding the boundaries you've never learned to set. You didn't attract a narcissist by accident. You hired them to be selfish for you. This is what Jung called mutual shadow projection. And it creates what I call the symbiotic contract. It's an unconscious agreement that goes something like this. I'll be the good one, the selfless one, the morally superior one. And you be the bad one, the selfish one, the one who does what I'm too afraid to do. I'll carry your capacity for guilt and emotional depth, and you carry my capacity for self-interest and boundaries. Both of you get to remain psychologically incomplete. Both of you get to avoid the terrifying work of integrating your whole selves. But here's where it gets really twisted. Part of you needs them to be selfish, because their selfishness gives you permission to feel like the victim, which is so much easier than taking responsibility for your own life. Their bad behavior justifies your martyrdom. Their taking validates your giving. You're not in love with the person. You're addicted to the dynamic. And the most insidious part? You get a secret thrill from their transgressions. When they act selfishly, part of you lives vicariously through their freedom. When they cross boundaries, part of you experiences the liberation you've never allowed yourself. This is why these relationships are so intoxicating and so impossible to leave. You're not just walking away from a person. You're walking away from the only way you've ever known to experience your own disowned power. Jung described this as falling in love with your own soul image, the missing parts of yourself projected onto another person. For women who've over-identified with being nurturing and soft, they often project their inner masculine power, their capacity for logic, decisiveness, and action onto partners who embody those qualities. For men who've been trained to be overly accommodating, they often project their inner vitality, their emotional fire, their capacity for passion and boundaries onto partners who seem to possess what they lack. You're not seeing them clearly, you're seeing your own potential reflected back at you. But here's the part that nobody talks about. This isn't actually love. Jung called it an unconscious narcissistic impulse. You're not loving them, you're loving the idea of completion. You're in love with the fantasy that someone else can make you whole. This creates what psychologists call the magical other syndrome, the belief that there exists one person who can heal your wounds, complete your personality, and repair the damage from your past. You place an impossible archetypal burden on another human being. And when you do this, you're not actually in relationship with a real person. You're in relationship with a projection, a carrier for your own unconscious contents. You're using them to feel whole, just as much as they're using you to avoid their own emptiness. This is why the relationships are doomed from the start. Eventually, reality crashes through the projection. The person you thought you knew turns out to be a stranger. The qualities that once completed you now suffocate you. The dynamic that once felt like destiny now feels like a prison. And that's when the terror hits. Because underneath the helper role, underneath the symbiotic contract, underneath all the projection and fantasy, there's a void. There's the question you've been running from your entire life. Who am I if I'm not needed? What am I if I'm not fixing someone? This is the existential panic that keeps you trapped. Because walking away doesn't just mean losing a relationship. It means facing the possibility that without the drama, without the crisis, without someone to save, you might not exist at all. The fear isn't really about being alone. The fear is about being empty. But here's what's about to happen when you finally do walk away, when you finally break this unconscious contract that's been running your life. The person you've been completing is about to discover what it feels like to face their own void. And the ripple effects of that confrontation? They're going to be far more devastating than either of you ever imagined. Those ripple effects I mentioned, they start the moment you go silent. Picture this. The person who always had you on speed dial suddenly gets voicemail. The one who could dump their latest crisis on you anytime they wanted finds nothing. No response, no advice, no emotional cleanup crew rushing to their rescue. You've just unplugged their life support system. And their reaction? It's going to tell you everything you need to know about what this relationship really was. Watch what happens when you stop being available. Not dramatic, not angry, just unavailable. Suddenly, the person who barely noticed your existence when they didn't need anything becomes very interested in where you went. The texts get more frequent. The calls get more desperate. They might show up at your door, send mutual friends to check on you, or suddenly remember your birthday after forgetting it for years. Their panic isn't about missing you. It's about missing their emotional supply. Because here's what you've been to them: a human Xanax. A walking, talking anxiety reducer. When their world got chaotic, they could offload it onto you and walk away feeling lighter while you carried the weight. But now they have to sit with their own discomfort. They have to feel their own feelings, solve their own problems, regulate their own emotions. And for someone who's never developed those muscles, it's terrifying. You know what's fascinating? They'll get angry at you for having boundaries. Think about that for a second. Someone is angry at you for taking care of yourself. Their rage at your self-preservation is the most honest thing they've ever shown you about how they really see you. Not as a person with your own needs, your own limits, your own life to live. As a resource, as a service, as something that should always be available when they need it. And the people around you, the mutual friends, the family members who benefited from your peacemaking, they're going to pressure you to go back. Just talk to them. You're being too harsh. Can't you just forgive and move on? Their discomfort with your boundaries reveals how much they depended on your sacrifice too. Because your role as the family emotional manager, the friend group therapist, the workplace crisis counselor, it served everyone. When you absorbed all the drama, processed all the pain, fixed all the problems, it meant everyone else could stay comfortable in their dysfunction. Your silence doesn't just affect one person. It affects entire systems that were built on your emotional labor. But here's where it gets really wild. Your withdrawal doesn't just create chaos, it creates opportunity. Because when you stop enabling people's emotional immaturity, you force them to either grow up or find another source of supply. Some will choose growth. They'll be forced to develop their own coping skills, their own emotional intelligence, their own capacity to sit with discomfort without immediately offloading it onto someone else. Your exit becomes their invitation to evolve. Others will simply find a new victim. They'll seek out another empath, another helper, another person willing to sacrifice themselves on the altar of someone else's dysfunction. And honestly, that tells you exactly what they thought of you all along. You weren't special to them. You were useful. But here's the most important part. The part that's going to change how you see this entire experience. Your withdrawal of emotional supply isn't cruel. It's medicinal. Think about it this way. If someone was physically dependent on a drug, would the most loving thing be to keep supplying it, or to stop enabling the addiction even though withdrawal would be painful? Your emotional availability had become their drug. Your constant fixing, your endless patience, your willingness to absorb their chaos. It was preventing them from developing their own emotional immune system. By staying, by continuing to enable, by being their eternal safety net, you weren't helping them. You were keeping them dependent. And the guilt you feel about walking away, that's not your conscience speaking. That's your programming. That's the voice of a system that trained you to believe your worth comes from your usefulness to others. Real love sometimes looks like stepping back and letting people face the consequences of their choices. Real compassion sometimes means refusing to rescue someone from the growth their pain is trying to create. The most loving thing you can do is sometimes to leave. Because here's what your quiet exit is really doing. It's not just changing your life, it's initiating a transformation in everyone who depended on your sacrifice. Some will rise to meet it. Others will reveal their true nature by seeking easier prey. But all of them will be forced to confront a question they've been avoiding. Who are they when they can't use someone else as their emotional crutch? And that confrontation, that forced reckoning with their own emotional void, it's going to reveal something profound about the entire system you've been trapped in, and why your exit isn't just necessary, it's revolutionary. That revolutionary transformation I mentioned. It's not just happening to them, it's happening to you too. And this is where everything you thought you knew about yourself gets turned upside down. Because when you step back from that symbiotic contract, when you stop being everyone's emotional janitor, something uncomfortable starts to surface. You begin to see how your helping was sometimes hurting. I know that stings. But follow me here. Think about the people you've rescued over the years. How many of them actually changed? How many of them developed their own strength, their own resilience, their own ability to handle life's challenges? Or did they just become more dependent on you? Every time you rushed in to fix someone's problem, you robbed them of the opportunity to fix it themselves. Every time you absorbed their pain, you prevented them from learning how to process it. Every time you enabled their dysfunction, you participated in keeping them small. This is what Jung called the process of individuation, the psychological necessity of each person developing into their full, autonomous self. And you, in your well-meaning helpfulness, have been interfering with that process. Not maliciously, not consciously, but your rescue missions have been keeping people in a state of psychological infancy. You've been loving people in a way that keeps them weak. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Part of your identity was built on other people staying broken. Because if they healed, if they became whole, if they no longer needed you, who would you be? Your helper persona required victims to rescue. Your sense of worth depended on other people's dysfunction. You had an unconscious investment in their problems continuing. This is why your exit is so terrifying. Not just for them, but for you. Because stepping back means facing the possibility that your entire identity has been built on a foundation of codependency. But here's what's beautiful about this realization. You're not less compassionate for seeing this. You're more conscious. Real compassion isn't about absorbing someone's pain. It's about holding space for them to feel their own pain and grow from it. True love isn't about fixing someone. It's about believing in their capacity to fix themselves. When you withdraw your compulsive helping, you're actually offering them something far more valuable than your previous enabling. You're offering them the gift of their own strength. Think about a parent teaching a child to ride a bike. At some point, they have to let go of the seat and let the child wobble, maybe even fall. That's not cruelty. That's necessary for the child to develop balance and confidence. Your emotional withdrawal is the psychological equivalent of letting go of the bike seat. Yes, people might wobble, they might even fall, but that's how they learn to ride on their own. And here's what's fascinating. The people who are truly ready to grow will thank you for this. Eventually, they'll recognize that your stepping back forced them to step up. They'll see that your boundaries taught them to develop their own. Your exit becomes their opportunity to discover their own power. But the people who aren't ready, they'll paint you as the villain. They'll tell everyone how selfish you've become, how you've changed, how you've abandoned them in their time of need. And you know what? Let them. Because their story about your transformation tells you everything you need to know about what they thought your role should be. In their narrative, you're supposed to be endlessly available, infinitely patient, perpetually self-sacrificing. Their anger at your growth reveals their investment in your smallness. This is where you have to make a choice. Do you shrink back into the comfortable prison of the helper role to keep everyone else comfortable? Or do you stay with the discomfort of your own evolution? Because here's what's really happening. You're not just leaving a toxic dynamic. You're modeling what healthy boundaries look like. You're showing everyone around you that it's possible to love people without losing yourself. You're demonstrating that real strength isn't about how much you can carry for others. It's about knowing what's yours to carry and what isn't. And that example, that's going to ripple out in ways you can't even imagine. Some people will be inspired by your courage to set their own boundaries. Others will be forced to confront their own patterns of emotional dependency. Entire family systems might shift because one person decided to stop being the designated emotional caretaker. Your quiet exit isn't just personal transformation. It's systemic revolution. But I know what you're thinking right now. You're probably feeling guilty about all of this. You're wondering if you're being selfish, if you're hurting people, if you're becoming the very thing you've always despised. And that guilt, that fear of being seen as selfish, that's not your moral compass speaking. That's the voice of a system that programmed you to believe your worth comes from your usefulness. It's time we had a conversation about what's really behind that fear. That guilt you're feeling, that voice telling you you're being selfish, cruel, abandoning people in their time of need. Let me tell you exactly what that is. That's the voice of a system that programmed you to believe your worth comes from your usefulness. Think about where that voice comes from. Whose words are those, really? Your mother who needed you to manage her emotions? Your father who required you to be mature beyond your years? The family that fell apart when you weren't there to hold it together? That guilt isn't your moral compass. It's your conditioning. It's the internalized voice of everyone who benefited from your self-abandonment, telling you to get back in line. Jung called this the negative animus for women, that relentless inner critic that attacks with rigid, impersonal judgments. It whispers poisonous rules. A good person is always available. You're selfish if you have needs. Love means sacrifice. These aren't universal truths. These are the chains of your psychological prison. But here's what that voice is really afraid of. It's not afraid you'll hurt others. It's afraid you'll discover your own power. Because the moment you stop defining yourself by how much you give, you have to face the terrifying question, what do you actually want? When you've spent your entire life focused on everyone else's needs, your own desires become foreign territory. Who are you when you're not performing? What do you enjoy when you're not serving? What do you dream about when you're not fixing someone else's nightmare? This is why the guilt feels so intense. You're not just changing your behavior, you're undergoing a complete identity transformation. The person who finds worth in sacrifice is dying, and the person who finds worth in wholeness is being born. And that death, it feels like annihilation. Because for so long, your helper identity has been the only thing standing between you and what felt like complete emptiness. But here's the revolutionary truth that's going to change everything. That emptiness you're so afraid of? It's not emptiness, it's space. Space for your authentic self to finally emerge. You know what you're really discovering? You're discovering that you were never actually empty. You were just so full of everyone else's stuff that there was no room for your own essence to breathe. Your empathy was real. Your compassion was genuine. But it was trapped in a broken delivery system, a system that confused love with self-abandonment, kindness with enabling, and strength with the ability to absorb unlimited pain. You're not becoming less empathetic. You're becoming more discerning. There's a huge difference between compulsive helping and conscious service. Compulsive helping is driven by your own unhealed wounds, your need to be needed, your terror of being abandoned. Conscious service comes from a place of wholeness, choice, and clear boundaries. When you help from a place of woundedness, you're actually using the other person to feel better about yourself. You're medicating your own pain with their gratitude. That's not love. That's emotional vampirism disguised as kindness. But when you serve from a place of integration, when you've done your own healing work, when you know where you end and others begin, that's when your empathy becomes a superpower instead of a liability. This is what Jung meant when he talked about integrating the shadow. Your shadow isn't just your capacity for healthy selfishness. It's also your disowned magnificence. It's your leadership potential, your creative genius, your ability to inspire and transform others, not through your suffering, but through your strength. You've been so busy admiring others' power that you forgot to claim your own. Think about the people you most admire, the ones who seem to effortlessly command respect, set boundaries, create beautiful things, lead with confidence. What you're seeing in them is a reflection of your own unlived potential. You can only recognize qualities in others that exist as seeds within yourself. But owning that gold, claiming that power, stepping into that magnificence, it's terrifying. Because with great power comes great responsibility. It's easier to stay small, to remain the helper, to live vicariously through others' achievements than to risk the vulnerability of your own greatness. The guilt you feel about setting boundaries isn't really about being selfish. It's about being afraid of your own power. Because once you stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable, once you stop dimming your light to avoid outshining anyone, once you stop playing small to maintain the status quo, you become a living example of what's possible. And that example is dangerous to systems built on keeping people small. Your transformation threatens everyone who's still trapped in their own helper persona. Your boundaries challenge everyone who's still afraid to set their own. Your wholeness confronts everyone who's still fractured. You're not just healing yourself, you're modeling what sovereignty looks like. And sovereignty, true self-governance, the ability to rule your own inner kingdom with wisdom and compassion, that's what the world desperately needs right now. But sovereignty isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning of something even more beautiful. Because when you learn to love yourself with the same intensity you once used to save others, when you direct that empathic superpower inward first and then outward from a place of overflow rather than emptiness, that's when the real magic begins. That magic I mentioned. It's what happens when you complete the full alchemical transformation, when you've taken the lead of your trauma and turned it into the gold of wisdom. The ancient alchemists understood something profound about transformation. They knew that to create gold, you first had to dissolve everything down to its essential elements. The nigredo, the blackening, the dark night of the soul you experienced when your helper identity collapsed. Then came the albedo, the whitening. Those first moments of clarity when you could see the dynamic for what it really was, without the overwhelming emotional charge. When you realized you weren't crazy, you weren't selfish, you were just finally seeing clearly. But this is the rubedo, the reddening, the return to life, the integration of everything you've learned back into the messy, beautiful reality of being human. And what emerges from this process? Not someone who's lost their empathy, but someone who's transformed it from a compulsive wound response into a conscious superpower. You know what the difference is between the old you and the new you. The old you felt everything. The new you chooses what to feel. Your empathy is no longer a wide-open wound that absorbs every emotional frequency in the room. It's become a finely tuned instrument that you can adjust, direct, and when necessary, turn off. When someone comes to you now with their crisis, you don't automatically absorb their panic. You don't immediately jump into fix-it mode. You pause, you breathe. You ask yourself, is this mine to carry? Is this mine to solve? Or can I offer something more valuable, my presence without my participation in their drama? You've learned the difference between empathy and enmeshment. And the people who truly deserve your energy, they can feel the difference immediately. Because you're no longer approaching them from a place of need. Your need to be needed, your need to feel valuable, your need to avoid your own emptiness. You're approaching them from overflow. You've filled your own cup first. You've done your own healing work. You've integrated your own shadow, reclaimed your own power, and learned to love yourself with the same fierce protectiveness you once reserved for everyone else. Now when you give, it's a choice, not a compulsion. The relationships that survive this transformation, they become deeper, more authentic, more reciprocal than anything you've ever experienced. Because you're finally showing up as your whole self, not just the helper fragment that everyone was used to. And the people who can't handle your wholeness, their discomfort with your transformation tells you everything you need to know about what they thought your role should be. But here's what's truly beautiful. Your example ripples out in ways you might never fully know. Every boundary you set gives someone else permission to set their own. Every time you choose yourself, you model for others that self-love isn't selfish. It's essential. Your children, if you have them, grow up seeing what healthy boundaries look like. Your friends start questioning their own patterns of self-abandonment. Your family begins to understand that love doesn't require sacrifice of the self. You become a walking example of what's possible when someone decides they're worth protecting. And your empathy, it becomes even more powerful than before. Because now it comes from a place of choice rather than compulsion. Now it's informed by wisdom rather than driven by wounds. Now it serves the highest good rather than enabling dysfunction. You can sit with someone in their pain without taking it on. You can offer support without offering solutions. You can love people without losing yourself in them. This is what Jung called the birth of the self, not the ego that needs to be needed, but the integrated wholeness that can engage with the world from a place of sovereign love. Your quiet exit wasn't the end of your empathic journey. It was the beginning of your empowered one. Because the world doesn't need more wounded healers carrying everyone else's pain. The world needs more sovereign empaths who have learned to alchemize their sensitivity into strength, their wounds into wisdom, their trauma into transformation. You didn't lose your gift. You refined it. And that refinement, that transformation from compulsive helper to conscious healer, from wounded empath to integrated wholeness. That's not just personal evolution, that's spiritual revolution. You've learned the ultimate truth. The most rebellious thing you can do in a world that profits from your self-abandonment is to fiercely, unapologetically, completely love yourself. Your quiet exit wasn't revenge against those who took advantage of your empathy. It was the reclamation of your own soul. It was the birth of who you were always meant to be before the world convinced you that your worth lay in your usefulness to others. You are not here to be everyone's emotional support system. You are here to be the fullest expression of your own magnificent self. And that self, that integrated, boundaried, sovereign, empowered self, that's your gift to the world, not your endless availability, not your compulsive helping, not your willingness to disappear into other people's problems. Your gift is your wholeness. Your gift is your example. Your gift is showing others what's possible when someone decides they're worth the difficult, necessary, transformative work of loving themselves completely. The empath's exit isn't an ending. It's a beginning. It's a birth. It's a revolution. And you're not just surviving it, you're leading it.